All right. Welcome, people, to this episode of the Vision2Mission podcast. Today, we have a very special treat for you coming straight out of the turnpike. My main man, Johnny Rivera, who is the lead evangelist for the Central Jersey Church of Christ, is joining us today. We're going to be talking about all kinds of engaging topics with regards to leadership, community, family, etc. Johnny has been a very close friend of mine for well over 10 years. He's a fantastic family man, amazing leader and connector. So I definitely encourage you to check him out and check out the Central Jersey Church of Christ in our show notes at the end of today's podcast. So Johnny, welcome. How are you?
Doing well, Brandon. Glad to be here and see you and connect even in this way. So it's great to be with you.
No, absolutely. So I definitely appreciate it. So, okay. So what we do here on the Vision2Mission podcast is we dive right in. You know, we just kind of get into whatever we're going to talk about and immediately get engaged for our listeners. So, Johnny, you've been in the full-time ministry since 2004. So what was your initial inspiration, like your pull to go from the secular world to join the ministry?
Yeah. So I became a Christian in 1997. I was an atheist. I became a Christian, and I really had a dream of really one day doing the full-time ministry. And I just think, 2004 was the time that God ordained for it to happen. And there was an opportunity here in Central Jersey, and I really wanted to move forward and give it a go and do the full-time ministry. And so I was excited at that time to just jump into it because it had always been a dream of mine to do that. But it was difficult. I left I have a family. At that time, 2 young kids, and I had a really great job. But I felt called by God to do it. And so, now 18 years later, I think it was a great decision.
No, absolutely. And it's funny. I've read different articles and looked at different things where people talk about you either have a vocation, you have a career, but then there are people who have a calling, right, in life. And I think a calling is something that draws you toward it. And so let's just kind of backtrack a little bit so that our listeners can get a little bit deeper understanding. So you were an atheist before, right? And so what was that bridge, really that took you from not believing in anything theistic, I guess you could say theocratic or whatever, to then, believing in God, and then specifically believing in God through Jesus. Kind of walk us through what was that journey.
Yeah. So I was an atheist largely in part because I grew up, I think, my family wasn't very religious at all, but I grew up around religious people, and I just remember their lives just not being exemplary and really didn't look very different. And in some cases looked worse than people who weren't religious. And so I just kind of said, okay, if these are God's people, there can't really be a God. I think that's kind of where I started going. And then, in my later teen years, this kind of started, early on. And I think in my later teen years, I started to think about, human suffering and different issues where I just felt like, okay, there can't really be a God. So, I got married at 19, had kids at 20. And so, but I was an atheist, definitely, at that time. But my wife was always in search of God. And so she had, started to really study the Bible and found church and just, she then, became a Christian. And then, I would combat some of her beliefs with different thoughts and ideas. And she goes, well, why don't you read the Bible for yourself?
Right.
And that's what I did. I read the Bible from cover to cover. The Old Testament, it was murky waters for me. I didn't really totally get it. Some of the stuff was just difficult to understand. But then I got to the New Testament and the Gospels, and it started clicking. And I remember reading it and saying to myself, oh, there's something to this. There might be something really to this. And I think simultaneously as I was reading, my wife was making life changes and character and just that really impacted me. And and so her example combined with how I was reading, and I felt like, God was making clear to me, it got very clear to me that this is all real. And it's interesting. The day that I decided, okay, I'm going to study the Bible because I need to become a disciple of Jesus. It was a Father's Day service. And it's funny because I'm not artsy at all. But at that church service, they had this skit, a father-daughter thing, Butterfly Kisses the song, and then they're acting it out or something like that. And I remember thinking okay, if I don't get right with God, I'm going to be separated from my family. This isn't good, and at that moment I said, okay, I got to do this. And the next day I made a phone call to my wife. She was shocked because I never let on that my heart was being moved. And I studied the Bible, and I got baptized 10 days later. So
amazing.
Yeah, so that's my story. That's how I came to that point.
Oh, well, at the end of the day, you were decisive, right? And I think it definitely seems that, of course, God was working in the background, right, for a period of time, and then just with of course, the right timing always being there for you to then read and then come closer to Him. So kind of fast forwarding, right, from 97 to 2004. So what were some of your, kind of looking back in retrospect, right? Not necessarily a super specific time frame, but let's say the first 5 years of you being in the ministry, now having been in there for, 18 years, what are some of the major lessons that you learned those first several years, being in the ministry?
Yeah. I think, the first thing I would say is that, the church as a whole, in our fellowship, we were going through a lot of changes and growing pains and repentance. And there was just kind of a lot going on. And one thing that I kind of remember is I really didn't know what I was doing when I first started. And I got to say, looking back now, I think that kind of played as an advantage in some ways. It was actually a positive thing because the truth is we were at a time that none of us had quite really experienced in the church. And so coming from a blank slate, it actually allowed me to, experience and try different things in where I wasn't locked into a certain way of doing things, and allowed me to be free and kind of think about things a little bit more freely. And in that sense, I think it really helped. And so one of the things I think I learned is sometimes when you don't know, it causes a stronger reliance on God, which I think is essential. So I think that's one. And then the other key one I would say is that, I learned kind of how to, get a church from a state of apathy to a state of kind of revival, thinking about, okay, wait a second, we've got to be about being like Jesus. And that was something I think very key, just going from working through the apathy and first of all, working through the hurt and the feelings and all that needed to be worked through. And then there was a state of disillusionment and then apathy. And then, working through that, I feel like I learned a lot during that time about, leading people and really helping people, progress in their journey. And so, yeah, I think those are a couple of things that I think early on learned in my early years of ministry.
Absolutely. And so for those who don't know, like I had moved up to New Jersey in 2003, right? And Mr. Johnny Rivera was the one who was the presiding minister over my wedding with my wife, Jennifer, the wife of my youth, as I call her. But Johnny, I can honestly say this. I'm like, because it's interesting how you say about you, because you didn't know what you were doing. But let me tell you, I think one of the major strengths that you and Glory had and still have is that you all were just very down to earth and connected. And there was not only the ministry, but there was friendship, right? And, there was true relationship. And I think that really worked to your advantage because, for people who come in and kind of air quotes know what they're doing, right? Maybe there's a more delegation, right? Maybe there's more, okay, let me administer and run this thing versus kind of getting down and talking to people and having real relationships and connections and conversations. And that's really been the foundation, as far as I'm concerned. I haven't been there in several years, but of Central Jersey and what my experience has been there. And I think that's what's made the church so strong, honestly, And so God was like, yeah, okay, well, you have to learn the job per se, but you connected with the people. And that's what Jesus did, right? He connected with the people, and that's what made it so strong. So it's just, I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful for that to this day. And, to be perfectly honest with you, and from visiting different places, when I've experienced different ministries, that has been something that's been missing, for sure. It's really connecting. And in fact, I had when I was converted at American University in grad school, I was a Bible talk leader, there, and because they didn't have any, male leadership. And so I kind of stepped in, and I was an intern for a little while. But then I remember the day that they took me out of leadership and took me out of being an intern. And I had to have a conversation with a couple of individuals, but I just remember what they had shared with me. And they said, well, Brandon, you're a great spokesperson, right, per se, and this and that, but no one in your ministry knows you. And it was really one of the first times it hit me right in the face about my character, my personality, that I was so shallow, that all I really cared about was looking good and sounding good and representing, right? And I think that was part of the church culture back then, if we're honest about it, right? A lot of the prestige, a lot of the veneer of all that. And I fell for it completely, and I look back and I'm like, man, but at the same time, there's some truth and honesty there where your people need to know you, right? And they need to trust you and be connected with you.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to kind of let you know, again, that's something that I think it's been deeply ingrained in your character and hasn't changed,
Yeah.
And so, and especially, of course, with your wife and Glory connecting with Jennifer and the group of women that, have still been close with my wife even to this day.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I remember talking about connecting, and I appreciate everything you shared. It's encouraging to hear. I remember us having 24 marathons with you guys, and we watched 24 for a couple of hours. They don't make shows like that anymore. But
no, oh my gosh,
great. Oh my gosh, we would be watching that for hours. So it wasn't just a minister, congregant relationship. We were friends, and we still are friends,
Yes.
And you guys were the first wedding that I ever did. And
that's right.
I just did a wedding this past Saturday. I lost track. It's somewhere in the 40s or 50s now. I've done quite a bit of. But you guys actually the first wedding that I ever did. I remember it very fondly. But yeah, I think I am by nature very relational, and I think that did work obviously in my favor. And I think God has just designed me that way. And so I I just recently had an instance that kind of highlights your point. A brother called me from his job because he was talking to a coworker, and the coworker's like, "Oh yeah, well, you don't ever really get to pastors. They distance themselves from people and all this stuff." And so, he called me up from work just to prove a point. He calls me up, I pick up the phone, and we start joking around. And she goes, "You know who I'm talking to?" And he tells her, "This is my pastor." And he did that because he goes, I could call him. We joke around like he's like a human being. Like I could connect with him.
Right.
And, I don't say that even as that's how God made me. Like, I don't really know how to be anything else, And so, but that is a huge deal for people. I think people don't want to be led by a distant figure that's polished, that, seems like they're unattainable or you can't connect with them. I think leaders like that are going to have a very difficult time leading. And so yeah, I think that is really, honestly, the call of the day is to be that type of leader.
No, absolutely. And this, just thinking on a funny side, like I think that's probably one of the main reasons why God had me meet Jennifer, because Jennifer's like, let me bring you down. You way up here. And if there's a woman to tell the truth and tell it as soon as she sees it, it's her. And that's been great. And I'm really grateful for that. And so when we're looking at, again, just kind of, if you look at your ministry experience to date in terms of, let's say, increments of 5 years or so, whatever, what have been some of the leadership lessons you've learned? Like, because the church, I'm sure, has grown, right? This might have plateaued, it might have decreased and then grown again. So kind of looking from the beginning, right? Those first few years and then those middle years, and then now kind of coming post-COVID, what have been some of the major specific leadership in leading an actual congregation, right? Where you have people that are older, people with kids and families and marriages, and then you have single professionals, you have teenagers and on children's ministry. There's a wide range of people that belong to the congregation. So what have been some of your leadership lessons that you've learned kind of during those different time frames?
Yeah, I think one of the things, so I'll take over from where I left off before,
Sure.
That time of apathy, and then we kind of get into this next one. Now people are wanting to do things for God. They want to serve, and they want to give to people, and they want to love their neighbors and love people who are in need and all that stuff. And I think one thing that I try to impart upon people that I'm training or that I'm speaking to about leadership is that, especially in terms of ministry, is, one of the key things is to be able to inspire the people that you lead to really dream for what they want to see happen, and then for you to get out of their way and support whatever it is that God has put on their hearts. And I think that's really key, because sometimes, as leaders, we want things a certain way, and then we kind of maybe overanalyze it, or we have our own direction and that we want to go in that might be contrary to where, and I think, of course, as leaders, there's certain boundaries we have to keep, and, we got to make sure we're following God and that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about ideas and dreams that people have. I think hey, this is your dream. Okay, so what do we got to do to make this happen? And honestly, once you get that going, it's actually really powerful to see how God moves in the hearts and lives of people. But as a leader, you have to be okay with not being in control of every little aspect. You got to be okay with not micromanaging. And so I think that stage was very key, because that's what I kind of learned. Okay, let me, because the idea is you don't want to be a minister who's doing everything.
Right.
You want your people to be inspired and to be active and really, have their own dream for God. And, we're not, even when you look at scriptures, it says, for evangelists in Ephesians 4 to equip the people for good works. And so the idea is that, as a minister, it's not for me to do everything for them. It's for me to equip them so that they could do God's work. And so I think that's what I really learned in those next 5 years. We got more outward focused, and I think really we focus on serving the poor. And it had a chain reaction after that, because then after that, evangelism became more in the norm and more natural. And then, we grew. I mean, we when we took over in 2004, we were about a little over 200 members, and we're over 350 now. And we have,
Fantastic.
3 different regions. We have 3 elders. I've appointed a couple of evangelists, one being, Kai, who's down there with you guys.
Yes, yes.
And then Paris Cunningham, who's still here with me.
Right.
He's in Mercer County. And so a lot has happened. Incredible victories have happened since then. But that next 5-year period was really about let's get everybody kind of moving in the same direction. And the other part for leaders, I would say, in that is that, you do yourself a favor when the people generate their own ideas, because then they own it. And it's not you trying to sell them on some, hey, I'm trying to sell you on my idea, so come on, go do this. No, they were motivated because it was their idea. And so I was there to support and minister to them. And I still, when I train younger ministers, I always say, and this is, to me, this is very key to Christian leadership. You have to make sure that you're ministering to your people and not to yourself. And what I mean by that is sometimes we have our own ideas as ministers, and we minister to those ideas. Like we're serving those ideas. Ministering to people is thinking, okay, where are they at? Let me minister to their needs. And I think it's a powerful thing when you look at the scriptures, when the whole church is moving and new ideas are coming up and God is just moving in the hearts. I think it's powerful when you can, really see that. So I would say that's probably, the next 5. There's more things I've learned later, but that, I don't want to take this length for too long, but that's some of the stuff there.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think, honestly, it's in a good way. It's kind of a playbook, in a sense for people to, I think for ministers, to connect with members of the congregation and vice versa. Right. And not just kind of play church necessarily because it's something that we've dedicated our lives to. Right. It's an ideal. But it's not just an ideal, but it's to whom we've dedicated our lives, right? To God. And so there's that mutual connection that we have. And so it gives people hope, right? And as you said, we all need inspiration in some form or fashion. And sometimes we need that spark every single day, or sometimes we need a bigger catalyst to kind of get us moving, right? For sure. And I can only imagine the number of ministry staff and around the country or around the world, people who've gotten burnt out, right? Yeah. Because they've felt like, or they've been compelled to do everything themselves. Whereas, like you said, but what about equipping your people? Because there's so much talent out there, right? There's so much of a resource through people where, God can use those couple loaves of bread and fish through people to multiply and serve so many others. But and at the same time, we run into challenges, right? And nothing is even close to perfect. And in the early months of 2020, the entire world fell into a major challenge, and so kind of looking back at 2020 and even 2021 through the present, what were, again, I think it's kind of rhetorical to say what were some of the challenges the church faced, because we all face the same things, right? But
Yeah.
what did you and Gloria and what did you and the other ministry staff do, especially during that time and on the tail end of, let's say, 2021 coming into this year, to continue to minister to your people, to give them reassurance and to kind of walk through that challenge of the pandemic?
Yeah. No, that's great. I feel like 2020 through this year, I've grown more in these last 2 years than I probably did in the last 10 to 15 because of the challenges. Going into the pandemic, we were clicking on all cylinders. We had grown by 35% in 3 years.
Wow.
We were really growing and maturing, not only in numbers, but, as I said, in maturity. It was really, really going well. And then the pandemic hits. And it was tough, honestly, in the beginning, because I sort of had to, I call it reinvent myself, because how do you do ministry when, ministry is interacting with people and doing stuff and getting together for church and the idea of like meeting online, it just wasn't something I ever did, or I didn't even know, like, how am I going to move a congregation when we can't really have contact? And, just to be clear, we're in New Jersey, and New York and New Jersey got hit the hardest at the very beginning. And we got like the worst of it with, very little, like warning. We went from, hey, everything's great, to everybody stay home, don't move. Like,
right.
Like, wait, what are we supposed to do with this?
Right.
And then, you're watching the news and there's, body bags lining up at morgues. And it's like, I mean, this is insane. And then, we had members that had, like, every couple of days, family members that were passing, and it was pretty intense to kind of, all right, well, what are we doing with all this? And, I'm even thinking, like, I mean, can I do ministry? Do I need to go figure out how I'm going to, or how is this going to work? And, and so that was very, very challenging. And then, okay, so then I started to kind of see, okay, here's what I got to do. I kind of reset. It was probably a couple of weeks into it. I kind of reset. Okay, I'm going to have to start using online. Going to have to do this, going to have to do that. And started to come into play. And then, I think what a lot of ministers felt, I know for me I did, is, okay, so we figured that part out. And it almost, like, you would think, because we were working from home, that it's like, okay, so then it's like less intense pressure, or our schedules are easier. For me, I'm going to say my schedule got much worse.
How's that?
Because honestly, there was no real off switch. Like, so since you're working from home is work now. So there's not a clear line,
Right.
So you got that. Then it's like a constant barrage of things. So, like, I'm thinking, okay, well, hey, I got my own life, right? I got my family. So I got to say, okay, so how am I going to the supermarket, pick up things, for my family, take care of our kids, take care of, our family. Then it's like, well, man, I've got members, and I've got to make sure that, they have what they need, and people, are being taken care of. And then they've got family members dying. So now I'm trying to help them. And then all of this, I was kidding. There's a sister that works for the CDC. I became a part-time epidemiologist during this. Like, I'm trying to find out, okay, what's the deal with COVID? What do I need to be aware of? Because I need to make decisions on the behalf of 300 people. And so as elders, we're getting together. Okay, here's the information I got. So it was like, okay, here's another hat I'm wearing. The stress and the pressure and everything that's going on, how we're going to move forward. It was depressing. I mean, it was just really just a very difficult time. We got closer as a church, believe it or not, during that time, because also, you had a lot of racial strife, political turmoil, and there was a lot of drama. There was a lot of hurt. There was a lot of anger during that time. And we spent a lot of time connecting, believe it or not, online. And there was a point we were meeting every day online in the morning. Wow. And there'd be a group of people, we're there, and it'd be a pretty big group. And we're meeting online, and we're live on Zoom, talking through things. And it was pretty crazy. I would say towards the end of 2020, I physically started getting sick. And I had gone to a conference, maybe not gone to, I viewed it online, obviously, about mental health for ministers. And they gave this like outline to see if you have compassion fatigue, is what it was called. And I looked through the list, and I'm like, check. I mean, I had everything. I'm like, okay, clearly I got compassion fatigue at this time, because this is everything I'm feeling right now. And it's crazy because, just how the body, kind of lets you know. I tend to be experiencing things, but not really know what I'm feeling till like days later, sometimes weeks later. And so I got sick, upset stomach. I thought I had food poisoning, whatever. And that started a whole nother journey of months trying to figure out what was going on. And,
I remember our conversations about that.
Yeah, we talked a lot about it. And, now looking back, that was my body saying, hey, you need to stop. You need to slow down. You need to reassess. You got to really, you've reached your limit. And that's clear to me now. It was not clear at that time. I thought I had all, don't ever Google your symptoms, because you're going to come out with 14 different diseases. But, I had all the, info. I'm like, what is going on? And so I really learned a lot about myself at that time. And that started a whole nother journey about me. Like, why do I function the way that I do? Why am I struggling at this age in life with anxiety and stress? I've always just been able to just keep chugging along, and, and then, could my, GI issues really be about anxiety and stress? Like, that can't be the issue. And I learned a lot about, myself along the way, and how I needed to adjust how I viewed leadership, how I set boundaries for myself, and how I took care of myself. Because, if I'm being honest, like, people will take and take and take, because this is your job, right? And unfortunately, my strength and weakness is I'm very empathetic. I'm talking to a person, I could put myself in your shoes. I'm going to feel your pain. I'm going to connect with you. And people may really enjoy and love that, right? And that's great. But the negative to that is that sometimes it's hard for me to then unplug from that. And so I might have had a conversation 5 hours ago, but I'm still thinking about it 5 hours later and praying about that person. And I'm, and so it also wears on you. And I had to learn how to unplug, how to make sure I'm taking care of myself, and really, connecting with God and helping people from the overflow of my connection with God versus pouring myself out till I'm completely empty, and then now I'm scrambling to get full again. So that was like that. The pandemic time was an absolute journey for me to learn about what I needed to really grow in and mature in as a Christian.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think we definitely have a lot of those things in common. And I think, mine is not so much with ministry necessarily, but in my field, I help people financially in a variety of ways. And so, I kind of have this self mandate that, since I grew up in the city, and I grew up on the poorer side for sure. And it's like, I've got to help as many people as possible. And and kind of over the years, it can become very, very burdensome, right? Because we want to help people. We want to be able to give what we've been given in some form or fashion, right? And turn around and give that to somebody else and help them. And, Jesus did say the poor will always be among you, and it's like, it's kind of a matter of fact. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't give and serve. Absolutely not. But at the same time, we do have to make sure that we're looking at ourselves. And as you said, we have to take care of ourselves because, like they say, when you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, so you have the capacity, right, to be able to give. And I appreciate what you just said about the overflow, because I never really looked at it like that. Because if you have like this cup right here, right, if you're like right here, halfway down, what do you really have to give to yourself and to your family than to others? But if you have an overflow, right, then you're filled up yourself, and then you're at your best, right? You're at your fullest to be able to give to others. And so, kind of along with that, you've mentioned the ministry kind of coming through COVID and kind of post-COVID. How has it also helped you as a father and as a husband, and to be able to give and to serve your family?
Yeah, well, let me just say this. There's a great quote that really about this reservoir idea that I just shared with you. It's from Bernard of Clairvaux. And he says, the man who is wise, therefore, will see his life as more like a reservoir than a canal. The canal simultaneously pours out what it receives. The reservoir retains the water till it is filled, then discharges the overflow without loss to itself. Today, there are many in the church who act like canals. The reservoirs are far too rare. You too must learn to await this fullness before pouring out your gifts. Do not try to be more generous than God. And that quote really helped me to rethink how I approach leadership. And so my goal is to give from the overflow. Right. So kind of like you said, I even did an analogy for the church. It's like you're filling up a glass of water and then you have empty glasses underneath. And then you let the water come, and from the overflow, those other glasses get filled. Right. Versus, let me fill it up, pour it out, now fill it up, pour it out. It should be from the overflow, and I think that's a much more healthier way to really lead. And so, anyway, and in regards to the family, I have two adult kids, a 27-year-old and a 26-year-old. And, my daughter's in grad school, and that, she's an incredible student. She's seeking her PhD at Yale University, incredible student. But in academia, there are a lot of challenges, when you're trying to be a Christian in those circles, the conversations, the thoughts, the ideas that are pushed, are just very challenging to someone's face. So that's presented some challenges where, conversations and things that I've had to kind of, help my daughter think through, or just even pray about, because I'm not sure I could help her through. But it's very challenging. And our son, he had an accident. He was actually hit by a car a couple of years ago in 2018. And so he's been recovering. And it's interesting because he's an introvert. And so we would always joke around that, like, the pandemic, he loved it because he was like, I could just be home and not, because again, he's introverted. He was in his element. He kind of enjoyed it. But the pandemic presented its set of challenges, even in that, as a father, and as a husband, to my wife, because even in that, as I shared, I was learning about myself. And so I think even that, like, my wife probably had to carry more in terms of those conversations with our kids, because I'm trying to figure out what's going on in me right now. Right. So there was even that challenge as well. But I think the thing that, I think about with my kids, the thing I really appreciate is I wish my daughter didn't have to face some of the battles she faces in academia, but at the same time, I feel like it gives me insight into what our people need to be equipped with. And, I don't think the call of the hour is let's just share our faith more. I think the call of the hour is to really examine what's the landscape right now? What are the issues? Mm-hmm. And I think that, to be totally honest, I think many of us in Christianity have a somewhat lazy approach and then end up giving unintelligent answers, where they're really intelligent answers that we could combat some of this stuff that is put out in academia. But because we don't go after really learning this stuff, we give pat answers, or we give answers that, maybe don't challenge the intellect of those, when in reality, I think there's some great things that we believe and that we could even challenge in those circles. And I'm grateful that, and it says my daughter's in those circles, I get to hear a lot, and she picks up a lot. She's like, oh yeah, but there's hypocrisy in this, and there's hypocrisy in that. And so that's been really, even in that, in parenting, I feel like I've gained in leadership as well.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that, because it made me think of something. It's like, you kind of mentioned kind of the landscape and the call of the day. And so there's so much that, if you just go to any major news outlet, or if you just kind of go online, there's so much that's going on, in particular in our country, right? You can really pick at any point in time. You can go to any year and there's a lot of stuff going on, right? Mm-hmm. But I think I can honestly say that this is a very unique time, and there's a lot of unique and unfortunate, let's call it, influences, right, that are taking place, with regards to how people view themselves, how they view their identity of themselves, their sexual identity, right? There's just their overall social identity. Again, even though there have been issues with race relations for decades and decades, it really, kind of came to a sort of a pinnacle in 2020, the things that we're dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. And, how as a minister, what are you sharing with your family, with the congregation, specifically with regards to leadership, and what do men need to be doing to get out there to lead and help to change the narrative, right? So that, maybe we need to be looking at things a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm going to say in my realm of leadership, in terms of church and Christianity, I think I see sort of the opposite of what kind of the world presents. I think in the church, men often take more of a passive role, and I feel like the sisters are on it. Like, they want to do this, they want to do that, and then the brothers are like, yeah, I like to see some football games, and mind you, I love football. I'm there for 4 hours on a Sunday. Right. So, but I think, the men are needed now, perhaps more than ever. Mm-hmm. Because the thing I've been communicating to the church is, I believe we are in a time where this is going to become really clear who has a strong faith in God and who's just going through the motions. Because our beliefs and our, just our faith, I think is going to be, it already is being attacked, but I think it's going to be very hard to be a Christian without facing persecution. And now, mind you, I think in the long term, this is great for the church. The church does well when we're not comfortable and we have to deal with persecution. At the same time, I think there's some people in our churches that are going to fold like a deck of cards because of the challenges that we face. Because, hey, this is what the LGBTQ community says, and so what do you got to say? And if you say anything other than what we say, you're a bigot. And you know what? we've got to be able to equip our people. Like, how do we navigate these conversations? How do we do that? How do we not become like the crowd with Jesus and Barabbas, where the crowd, I know in that crowd, there were people who said, I don't totally agree with this, but I don't want to be the one to say, hey, let Jesus go, because everybody's saying let Barabbas go. Right. And I don't want to be that person. And I bet there were people in that crowd that were like, I wish I could say something, but I don't know what to say. So I'm not, and then there are probably people there that were just totally, in the wrong and going with Barabbas. But my goal, and what I've told the church is, I want to help those other two groups. The group that would like to say something but doesn't know what to say, and the group that is just scared because they don't want to go against the crowd. And I think, we need, men and women to really step in and really stand for our faith, have convictions. Now, I think, to be honest, Christianity, the church, kind of universal, has done things that are just dumb and wrong and sinful. And so, in a sense, we've kind of brought it on ourselves.
Sure.
For example, I think with the LGBTQ community, the church has highlighted particular sin more than others for whatever reason, and they've hurt that community. And you know what? We're facing the repercussions of that, and, you never see churches like have a protest against someone who's living with their heterosexual partner, right? And they're not married. Like, sin is sin, right? But, I think as a whole, the church, kind of has focused on something, this is really bad. But the fact that I'm prideful, the fact that I sin every day, well, I'm good, but they're really bad, right? And I think we've kind of hurt ourselves in that. And so now we find ourselves, okay, how do we navigate in this? And I think this is where brothers, I try to encourage, bro, we need you, man. We need you to be a voice. We need you to be an example. We need you to really stand up during these times and really, be active participants. And so I think that's something that, we really want to be able to impart on the church as a whole, but especially, the brothers, and really getting them engaged and really active, especially during this time.
Got it. And, and again, I said, male leadership specifically, right? And I say that because of this. Well, first of all, I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, right? So I was raised by strong female leadership, and I love it and respect it to the day that I die, period. And I also understand God's order of things and how he has set things, right? And I think what ends up happening is we've kind of gotten it mixed up. It's gotten murky, right? And not, and this, you can see the result if, like you said, if there's not clear male leadership in terms of not lording anything, not holding anything higher, but okay, there has to be a correct order in terms of men be great fathers, men be a great example, right? Men try not to be hypocrites, just generally, right? And he said, have a voice. And so, looking at the church and kind of looking at society, if you're looking at secularism or whatever, it's like, how can we make not necessarily even the church so much, but how can we make faith, right? Faith in God more compelling for people versus repelling? Because, there are a lot of issues out there where they're like, well, if you don't agree with me, like you said, well, then you're discriminating, you're a bigot or something like that. But I guess the core issue is that we're living according to a certain standard, right? Which is God's word. And so it's not really necessarily someone's issue with you, right? But it's like, okay, well, this is the standard according to which I'm living my life. And if we all would strive to do that, we could avoid so many issues. Are we going to be perfect, as you said? Absolutely not. Right. So far from it, far from it, but it just hurts me Johnny, like when I read certain things and I hear people say this and I hear people say that, I'm like, well, you claim to be a Christian, you claim this, but you're not.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is overflowing, right? It's the wrong overflow of the heart.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
you know, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so a couple of things came to mind when you said this. I think goes back to equipping the church.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's talk about men in particular, right? I'll give you a real life example. One thing I've learned over the years is that we have different upbringings and different understanding of basic terms. So
Okay.
I remember having this conversation with a brother. We're like, yeah, you could go to a retreat and be like, yeah, man, you got to connect with your family and you got to be present and really be there. And we could walk away from that with two very different understandings based off of what kind of family and what kind of upbringing you had, right? So, for instance, I was talking to this brother and he's like, yeah, for years, I'm like, my father left. So I'm in the house. So I'm present, right?
Right.
So he's like, hey, I've already done more than my father ever has before.
Right.
So his understanding of connecting with the family and being present was sort of basic in that way. And we don't realize sometimes we've got to go beyond that. And what does it look like to actually connect with your family? What does it look like to actually be present? And, those of us who are married, you could be sitting on the couch watching a movie with your wife, and then your wife be like, well, I feel like we're not connecting. And I'm like, I'm sitting right next to you. But it's a difference.
Yes.
And if you've never seen it and no one teaches you that, it's kind of like a clanging cymbal, it's just, noise. Right? Oh yeah, I'm connecting. Yeah, I'm here. I'm sitting right next to her.
Right.
And so these are things I think that we have to equip our people with. And then there are ideas I think that we've got to really help people understand. I'll give you an example of something where, like you mentioned, in today's society, how do we deal with some of these issues so that we're not labeled a bigot? I think one of the things we have to push back on in terms of Christianity and the LGBTQ community is we have to detach affirmation and love. One of the things that they've done strategically, and I think it's an effective strategy, especially if you're not paying attention as a Christian, is to say, well, you don't really love me if you don't affirm, the way that I live. For me as a Christian, this is a battleground we have to fight because it's just false.
Right.
I don't have to affirm what you're doing in order to love you. I can have unconditional love for someone without unconditionally affirming their life. For example, my mom, who I love, does stuff and makes decisions with her life I don't agree with. There ain't nobody going to tell me I don't love my mother.
Right.
So those ideas very clear. Like that does not equal, but I'm telling you, in the LGBTQ, they've attached it's unconditional love equals unconditional affirmation. And see, this is the battleground. I think as Christians, we've got to say, no, I can love you. I could have you over at my house for dinner. We could be great friends, and I could disagree with the way that you see life and that you've chosen to live life. I think that's a battleground we could fight. Another one as Christians that I think we have to be careful with is that, repentance of, let's say, being gay is not, in terms of Christianity, is not heterosexuality. It's not, oh, well, you're gay, now you have to be heterosexual. That's not really repentance. Repentance is holiness. That's the response. They don't actually ever have to become, quote unquote, heterosexual. They could be celibate. They don't actually ever have to do that again. But we've got to understand what battles are we fighting and have actual intelligent thought through. And so I believe this is the time where we've got to equip our people. How do I navigate in these spaces? And I will tell you that, once you could kind of explain it in that way, oh, okay, so then, really this isn't about, okay, now you're forcing me, I got to get married and have kids and have this, way of being, or
Right.
I'm never going to have a same-sex attraction thought ever again. Well, no, that's not really what you're being called to. What you're being called to is holiness and to live for God and live according to
Absolutely.
his will. And that's where true fulfillment. So it's like Jesus is better than this identity you're trying to live your life by. The
Right.
identity in Christ is much better than anything you're going to get there. And so choose that. And so anyway, those are just a couple of examples where I believe that, we've got to equip our people to be able to better engage in this current dynamic that we're in.
No, that's amazing. I couldn't agree with you more, with regards to that. And it just kind of makes me, especially as we're coming up on kind of midterms, right, with regards to Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2024, we have another election. It's like there's so much, there's such a dichotomy between people. Well, if you don't believe this, then I can't be your friend. I don't like you. I'm going to attack
Mm-hmm.
you. I'm going to hate you, right? When it's just kind of what a political belief is, right? It's not really that person through and through. And I think we've had so many issues in this country with regard to that. Like we've kind of made a hard left,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, but where's God in the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's sensibility in the picture?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where's that reasonableness? Where is that, that moderation and coming, kind of to a middle ground there?
Yeah.
Or if people, again, like you said, people say that they have a faith. Okay, well, is faith just a small compartment of your life, or is it your life, right? And then
Right.
kind of everything else is directed and dictated by that.
Right.
And I think people have to ask themselves that question, because if we don't
Mm-hmm.
ask ourselves that question, and if we're not honest about it individually, and like you said, decide not to be afraid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Decide not to be a part of the crowd, then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
continue to go down, the same road. So, kind of as we begin to finish off, what are some of your thoughts in terms of coming into 2023, right? Things that you are going to be working on yourself to continue to work on and change, and things that you are working to teach and to share with the congregation up there in Central Jersey, so that you can go out and affect as many lives as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, right now I'm actually, working on my master's in spiritual formation, and I'm going to probably go all the way through to get my
So let's
doctorate.
back up. Hold on. You said masters in spiritual formation.
Yes.
So kind of give me some context, because when I think of formation, I think of football, like I formation. You got the wing formation. You got this. So kind of explain, like, what are we talking about here with spiritual formation?
Yeah. So essentially, we're all being formed
Okay.
into someone. Whether you like to admit it or not, whether you realize it or not, we're all being formed into someone.
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual formation is intentionally engaging into being formed to the image of Christ.
Got it.
We were created that way,
Mm-hmm.
but in a sense, we reject it and engage in other areas and allow other things to form us,
Mm-hmm.
form our way of thinking, and so on. And so, spiritual formation is much more about engaging in the activities that get you in the space where God can transform you.
Gotcha.
And I think that's kind of the crux of it. I have personally benefited greatly from it, and I believe this is something. I believe in our fellowship of churches, this hasn't been a huge focus, because I like to say we focus a lot more, and it's great. We can't be strong in everything, but we do have to challenge ourselves to grow and mature.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were great on the first half of the Great Commission and not so great on the second half,
Right.
which is continue to teach, to obey everything that I've commanded
Right.
you. I think we're great at getting folks to the water, and then I don't think we've done a great job in really maturing people. That's why if you look at our fellowship, we baptize, folks at the same rate that they leave. That's just not, there's something wrong there. That's very unhealthy, and we've got to get to the bottom of that. And I think it has to do with us not properly maturing people. So that's what that field is. And so I've learned quite a bit about that. So I don't know if you wanted me to go back to your other question, but I just wanted to explain what spiritual formation.
No, please do. Absolutely. So thank you for giving some clarity. It's awesome. Yeah. So kind of coming into this next upcoming year in 2023.
Yeah. So like I said, so I'm going to school. I want to go all the way through to get my doctorate. I feel like I need to engage more in academia. I believe I need to be able to better equip the people that I lead to be able to engage in this culture and with, again, faithful, intelligent arguments against what the world is giving us. And I think that I really am trying to focus on that and focusing on really training younger leaders. I'm getting, as you can see from the gray and the lack of anything up here, I'm getting up there in age, and I got to really make sure that I'm passing the baton and I'm really training, younger leaders. And so that's kind of what I'm really focusing on going forward here. And, I think in regards to like the church, how this plays out, I think you mentioned this earlier. I think one of the biggest poisons, if not the biggest poison over the last several years in the church has been politics. I don't even think it's race. I think race is affected because of the politics.
Agreed.
And I think a lot of folks don't realize they're taking their cues from political figures more than they're taking their cues from Jesus. And I think if you just examine things straight from the Bible, you realize that both sides have things and views that go against the Bible. There is no Christian party. I mean, we're not even a Christian nation. Even that idea is silly. But you got Christian nationalism out there, and people like they're latching on to, parties and all this is the way. And it's like, if you're fair, like there's wrong on both sides, and there's hypocrisy, and we shouldn't be putting our faith and trust in political figures more than Jesus.
Right.
And I think that's been a huge poison. And I got to tell you, when it gets around time for elections, I try to like minimize the amount of time I spend on social media because it just gets crazy. And then I'm looking at Christians talking like somebody on a network news channel, and I'm like, wait, what? Like,
right.
Are we Christians? Like, why are we talking like this? This is crazy. And so I think that's a major thing going forward. And thankfully, my church isn't overly political, but sometimes some of the political ideas kind of seep in. And for instance, conversations about race became more complicated than they need to be because of politics, but people don't realize how politics have polluted their minds.
Right.
So those are the things I think going forward that I'm really kind of focusing on and trying to, me grow as well as equip my people to grow as well.
No, and I appreciate that and respect that because you kind of see it for what it is, right? And not skirting the issue. And, as you know, like down here in the DC metro area, the DMV, it's hot. And I'm not talking about climate. It's hot. Yeah. And it's like,
and you got people who work in the government who are,
lots of military government. Absolutely. Yep. And me personally, I'm not really big on social media. I allow Anton to be my eyes and ears on social media because he's way into it. And I just kind of hear things from him because I know for me personally, I'll get angry, and I'll allow it to kind of stay there and simmer and stay with me. And it is just definitely not right because I get very opinionated about things. And it's true. I think that there's 7 days in the week, right? And if so many days out of the week, if we're allowing ourselves to ingest so much stuff, eventually is just going to end up having an effect on us, where if we're not bringing in more relationships, more, reading God's word, prayer, right? If we're not allowing those things to be dominant, well, something else is going to be,
right.
At the end of the day. And so again, I think that's choices that we have to make, and kind of how we all need to be guided, and led, hopefully, so that we can make those wise, decisions, so that we can treat people with love and respect, right? And we can treat them with that unconditional love, where we may not affirm so much, as you said, what their choices are in life, but, we're loving them the way that God loves us, right? And I think we really need to, really take some time to reflect on that. So I really appreciated this conversation with you, Johnny. I look forward to doing it again. Again, just much love to everybody up there in Central Jersey. And look forward to reconnecting with you soon. And for those who've been listening to this podcast, I'm sure that you've gotten a lot out of it. We'll put all the information for the Central Jersey Church of Christ and Mr. Johnny Rivera in our show notes for sure. Johnny, thank you so much for sharing about your life, your experience, your wisdom with us. We've all, definitely grown from it. Thank you so much.
Amen. Well, thanks for having me. And any hate mail that you're sending, send it to Brandon.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I'll put a fake email address down all day. All right, people, this has been an amazing podcast here with Vision2Mission. Definitely an amazing episode with Mr. Johnny Rivera. Look forward to seeing you all again. Take care. God bless, and see you soon.